The morning at Seoul Action Studio in Namyangju had begun like any other day on the set of Silent Trace. The high-budget action psychological drama that had been dominating entertainment headlines long before its first episode even aired. The sky was unusually clear, the air crisp, and the production crew, though exhausted from 17 consecutive days of filming, moved with a rhythm that signaled both familiarity and quiet determination. No one expected that within just minutes, the entire filming site would descend into chaos, screams, running footsteps, and equipment, and the horrifying echo of paramedics shouting orders over the sound of wailing sirens. What started as a routine action sequence rehearsal would soon become one of the most terrifying incidents in recent K-drama production history. Lee Junho, the drama's lead and the actor known for his intense dedication to realism, arrived on set at 6:45 a.m., earlier than most of the cast. Witnesses reported he looked tired but focused, sipping a cup of black coffee as he studied the stunt storyboard for the rooftop chase scene. Today's schedule included one of the most high-risk scenes of the entire series. Junho's character had to leap from the third floor of a warehouse prop building, roughly 9 meters, onto a specially prepared air cushion. It was a stunt that stuntmen usually performed, but Junho had insisted on doing it himself. He had always been meticulous about authenticity, and his reputation for performing his own action scenes had become a hallmark of his acting career. What no one knew was that this decision, meant to bring raw energy to the series, would put him in the hospital before noon. Yoona, his co-star, arrived shortly after, clad in her character's rugged tactical outfit. She greeted Junho briefly, offering a small smile before slipping into her makeup chair. Several staff members described the energy between the two leads as unusually quiet, something that didn't go unnoticed, considering their typically bright, collaborative dynamic. The director, who had fought to keep today's scene despite warnings from the stunt coordinator about high winds in the area, pushed the entire crew to move quickly. They were behind schedule, and this jump was critical for episode 4, a pivotal moment where Junho's character escapes an ambush. The pressure, invisible but heavy, wrapped around everyone on set from the very beginning. The stunt team conducted their first safety check at 8:30 a.m., examining the air cushion, the landing angle, and the trajectory required for a safe descent. According to internal reports, the cushion had passed the first 2 checks, but the third, normally carried out moments before the actual stunt, was skipped after the assistant director urged the team to move faster. What remained unsaid, but now deeply relevant, that several crew members had privately expressed concerns about the wind direction that morning. The rooftop was slightly slick from overnight dew. Lighting technician later recalled, it didn't feel like a safe day to do a jump of that height. But Junho looked confident, and nobody wanted to be the voice slowing things down. At 9:20 a.m., the cameras were rolled into position. 3 cranes, 1 drone, and 2 handheld units were set to capture the moment from multiple angles. Yoona's scene involved chasing Junho to the rooftop and shouting after him as he prepared to leap. She stood on the edge, silently rehearsing her lines. Junho paced the rooftop twice, stretching his arms and neck with quick, almost rushed movements. A crew member noted, he warmed up for barely 3 minutes. Usually he takes at least 10. Meanwhile, the director shouted instructions through a megaphone, cutting through the morning air. Junho SSI. We'll go on your cue. Make sure you look back at Yoona before you jump. We need the emotion. The moment had arrived. Junho positioned himself at the edge of the prop building while staff below adjusted the cushion one final time. The cameras locked onto him. Crew members held their breath. Yoona later claimed that something in her chest tightened as she watched him prepare to move, though she couldn't explain why. The wind picked up slightly, brushing Junho's hair back. The drone camera hovered, waiting to capture the dramatic arc of the fall. A sudden silence fell across the set. The world itself were bracing for what would happen next. Junho looked over his shoulder at Yoona, just as the director had requested, and then sprinted forward. For a split second, it appeared that everything was going perfectly. The cameras caught his leap at the perfect angle. Kind of shot production teams dream about, raw, powerful, cinematic. But reality shattered that illusion almost immediately. As Junho descended, the wind shifted abruptly. Crew later described it as a sharp sideways push, enough to tilt his body off the intended landing path by just a few degrees, but those few degrees made all the difference. Instead of landing squarely in the center of the cushion, Junho crashed violently off axis. One foot hit first, twisting unnaturally, and the side of his head slammed against the reinforced seam of the pad. The sound of impact was sickening. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then screams erupted. Yoona was the first to reach him. The moment Junho hit the ground, she sprinted down the metal stairwell, shouting his name. When she reached him, Junho was lying still, unusually still, his eyes half open but unfocused. There was a faint trail of blood near his temple. Yoona dropped to her knees beside him, grabbing his hand. Her voice cracking as she pleaded, "Junho. Junho. Look at me," a makeup artist nearby later recounted. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely touch him. Staff members clustered around them, some calling emergency services, others waving frantically at on-site medics who ran across the lot with equipment in hand. The assistant director yelled for everyone to back away, but the panic was too great. Yoona continued to shake Junho's shoulder gently, filing her eyes as she repeated, "He's not responding. Why isn't he responding?" Crew members tried to pull her back, but she refused to move even an inch away from him. Medics arrived within seconds, but the scene felt like hours. They checked Junho's pulse, stabilized his neck, and tried to rouse him. Breathing was shallow. At one point, his body went completely limp. A grip technician who witnessed a moment said, "That's when everyone really lost it. There was this wave of fear. We thought we were watching him slip away right there." Yoona's face had turned ghost white. He clutched his hand until a medic gently forced her to step aside so they could load him onto the stretcher. Even then, her legs trembled so violently that she nearly collapsed. But she still followed the paramedics as they wheeled him out of the studio gate. Her eyes locked onto the motionless figure being lifted into the ambulance. When they shut the doors, her off from view, the shock hit her all at once. Her chest tightened, her knees buckled, and before anyone could catch her, she collapsed on the asphalt. A stylist screamed her name, and several staff rushed to help, but Yoona lay unconscious, her breathing shallow as panic overwhelmed her completely. The atmosphere spiraled into a full-blown crisis. One ambulance carrying Junho sped toward Seoul National University Hospital's Emergency Trauma Center, lights flashing violently as it wove through morning traffic. A second emergency vehicle was called for Yoona, who was showing signs of acute shock and dangerously low blood pressure. Two lead actors down within the same 5 minutes, something no drama crew had ever imagined facing. Back at the scene, the director ordered the set closed indefinitely. Crew members sat on equipment cases in silence, some crying, others staring into space, playing the horrifying moment in their minds. The production stunt coordinator was visibly devastated, his hands shaking as he spoke with investigators who arrived almost immediately after the incident. A lighting operator whispered to a colleague, "Told them the wind was too strong this morning. I said it twice. Why didn't anyone listen?" Long after the ambulances left, someone leaked a clip from the rooftop camera to the internet. It showed Junho losing balance mid-air, tilting off trajectory, and colliding with the side of the cushion. Impact looked far worse than anyone had expected. Within minutes, social media exploded with hashtags questioning why the production allowed such a dangerous stunt without proper backup safety measures. Dispatch and other major media outlets began calling the production team for statements, but no one was in any condition to answer. The entire atmosphere around Seoul Action Studio had turned somber. What was supposed to be a highlight action sequence had transformed into a scene of trauma, confusion, and heartbreak. As the last crew members were escorted out, one staff member murmured through tears, This is going to change everything." Only the beginning. From there, the story would continue to unfold at Seoul National University Hospital, where doctors raced to assess the severity of Junho's injuries, and where Yoona would regain consciousness hours later, still asking the same question, is he alive? Sirens cut through the morning traffic as the ambulance carrying Lee Junho arrived at Seoul National University Hospital's Emergency Trauma Center. Doctors and nurses rushed to the entrance the moment the vehicle stopped, pushing a gurney inside while shouting for a CT, MRI, and neurological evaluation. Studio chaos had followed him all the way here. Fans, media vans, and even several stunned crew members were gathering outside before the hospital could initiate crowd control. What became immediately clear to the medical staff was that Junho's condition was far more serious than initial calls had suggested. Inside the trauma bay, doctors worked quickly. Remained semi-unconscious, drifting in and out of awareness, wincing every time pressure was applied near his neck or shoulder. A neurosurgeon examined the side of his head, where the impact had left a deep bruise. An emergency scan. The results, only minutes later, showed a mild concussion, a cervical sprain, and signs of deep tissue damage across his right shoulder. Though not life-threatening, the injuries were severe enough to stop all filming indefinitely. One doctor later remarked privately, "Could have been fatal. The angle of impact was dangerous, he's lucky to be conscious at all." Meanwhile, in another wing of the hospital, Yoona slowly regained consciousness. The bright fluorescent lights and distant echoes of hurried footsteps made her disoriented at first. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself upright. For a moment she struggled to remember how she had ended up here. Then it hit her with a force almost as brutal as the moment on set, Junho collapsing, the blood at his temple, a limp in her arms. She looked around wildly, breath shallow, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Where is he? Please, someone tell me he's okay." The nurse at her bedside assured her that Junho was alive, undergoing tests, and being closely monitored. But the reassurance only softened a fraction of her anxiety. She insisted on seeing him immediately, but hospital protocol refused her request. Her blood pressure was still unstable, and doctors feared another collapse. Pressed both hands over her face, shoulders shaking as the weight of helplessness pressed down on her. Outside, the situation was spiraling. News outlets were already reporting the accident, with incomplete or exaggerated details. Headlines exploded across every major platform: "Deadly stunt gone wrong. Production under scrutiny." Fans demand answers. Social media erupted in panic, with clips of the leaked rooftop video spreading faster than the studio could attempt to contain it. Angry fans gathered at the hospital gates, demanding transparency and an official explanation. By late afternoon, both management companies finally released statements acknowledging the accident, confirming injuries, promising a full investigation. The messages, however, were vague, raising even more questions than answers. Critics accused the production team of prioritizing realism over safety. Stunt professionals across the industry began speaking out, calling the accident avoidable and a result of systematic pressure on actors to perform dangerous scenes themselves. Inside his hospital room, Junho finally woke fully and in pain. His first words, according to a staff member, were whispered almost inaudibly, "Where's Yoona? Is she okay?" Those present exchanged looks, surprised, emotional, before assuring him that she was safe. Resting in another ward, Junho closed his eyes, exhaling a shuddering breath as relief washed over him. Though pain followed immediately after. As night fell, the two actors remained under observation. Security was tightened due to the growing crowd outside. Hospital hallways buzzed with murmurs, staff discussing the accident, reporters trying to slip through, fans crying quietly as they sent messages of support through handwritten notes taped along the outer walls. It felt less like a hospital and more like the epicenter of a national shock. Investigators from the local safety committee visited the studio late in the evening, questioning stunt supervisors and reviewing weather reports. Early findings pointed to multiple lapses, skipped safety checks, high winds, time pressure, miscommunication between departments. Rumors of internal warnings that were ignored began circulating among crew members, adding fuel to the public outrage. Back in her room, Yoona asked again to see Junho. Though still weak, she pleaded enough that a nurse finally agreed to escort her once a doctor approved. It was close to midnight when Yoona, supported by two staff members, walked slowly down the quiet hospital corridor toward his room. Her steps were unsteady, expression fragile, but her determination unwavering. When she reached the door, she paused, taking a breath before entering. Junho was awake, head bandaged, neck supported, his face pale but alert. His eyes widened the moment he saw her. Tried to speak but emotion overtook her. Junho lifted his uninjured hand slightly as if telling her not to cry. She moved closer, carefully taking his hand in hers, both of them trembling in silence as a wave of relief softened the tension in the room. For the first time since the accident, it began to feel survivable. Outside, the world continued to debate, criticize, demand, and speculate. Production remained suspended indefinitely. Safety policies across the industry were being reconsidered overnight. The accident on the rooftop in Namyangju had shaken everyone, from actors to crew to fans, and its consequences would not fade easily. But in that dimly lit hospital room, machines humming softly and the chaos momentarily kept at bay. The only thing that mattered was simple and human: they were both alive. And for now, that was enough.